Hello, everyone.
Morning.
Good morning. How's it going?
Hello, everyone.
Is anyone in our group from Portland by chance? Do you know, Kim?
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm from Portland.
We got one.
Cool. There you go. Nice. I'm traveling for business right now. I'm in Portland. If you want to meet up and talk supply chain security later, that'd be cool.
Yeah, it should be great.
Okay. Bruno, is it?
Yeah, that's me.
Okay. So I'll message you.
Sure.
Share my screen. All right, we got quite a few things on the agenda today. We'll get started in a minute. Feel free to sign in if you haven't already. I pasted a link to our meeting notes in the Zoom Slack channel. All right, let's go ahead and get started. I have a first couple of items on the agenda. The second one we can maybe move to the end of the day if we have time. The first one was just a link that I wanted to share, and we saw this ThoughtWorks piece on Salsa. I thought it was pretty cool. Feel free to check it out. Is anyone from ThoughtWorks on the call or had anything to do with this? No.
Eric, I'm new here. I worked with them a lot. I was never an employee, but I worked with them a lot in the past. So it's a good report to get on.
Cool. Yeah, so check that one out. And then the next thing I put, and this is more of a discussion topic, and for some of the folks on the call, you can just tell me if there's already an issue for this, but one of the things we were talking about at my company was just like, does every company need to strive, or every project need to strive to get to Salsa 4, or even the higher Salsa levels if we do introduce them, and just kind of curious if people had thoughts on this, if there's already an issue, if there's some way we can say, well, if you're not touching PII or sensitive data, maybe Salsa 2 is enough, or just curious how folks have thought about this.
Yeah, I think that's also related to one of the other topics a little down below that I also added there about how to better communicate Salsa. I think there is a lot of confusion around that. I think on my end, the way I sort of view it is, Salsa 4 is aspirational. There's certain things like reproducibility, and that is, just given the state of things, is maybe not going to be something that is viable. But there is going to be other things that you probably can do, like hermeticity and whatever. I think we do want to hit as high of a level as we can. However, I think that there's also a lot of confusion around, great, let's say I'm Salsa 4. What does that actually mean? Like, but if my dependencies aren't Salsa 4, what does that mean? I think there's things there, and it helps prioritize, because if let's say I'm Salsa 4 and none of my dependencies are Salsa 4, what am I protecting against? I think that sort of question really needs to be answered in order to kind of have a more informed answer to your question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we've talked about higher levels as well. Like there's nothing stopping the group from introducing like a salsa level 5 that really goes deep in the transitive turtles all the way down problem. Trying to take notes while you're talking. So is there, we can talk about this more when we get down to your bullet point, Mike. Is there another comment? Someone has their hand raised. Melba?
Yeah, sorry, you'll have to excuse my voice. I'm a little sick. But to your point, Kim, on mapping it to like, let's say PCI or HIPAA, one of the things that I've been doing is trying to map it to the White House executive order and the new NIST frameworks, right? And so it's not clear, right, to many people. They just see SLSA, they think, that's the end all be all. And SLSA does a great job of addressing things that the White House executive order doesn't address. But then there's details that are still missing for, like, let's say the common areas that NIST or the White House executive order expects, right? So I do think that we need to get a little bit more granular and have kind of like a table mapping, just, to have, okay, HIPAA, PCI, White House executive order, whatever. If you meet these SLSA levels, then you would be compliant with these. I think that would be good for the industry as a whole.
Yeah, I agree with that. Anyone else? I see another couple of hands. Feel free to talk. I'm trying to note take.
Yeah, Tony was next.
Thanks. I just kind of wanted to tag on to what the last speaker was saying about that. My company actually gave a webinar recently where we talked about the SSDF that NIST released, as well as Google Salsa, and we described them as more complementary frameworks more than anything else. The way that I see it, the NIST SSDF is a lot more descriptive, whereas Salsa is much more prescriptive in that it suggests specific mitigation strategies to utilize. Of course, there's still gaps within it. Of course, there's no factor for internal threat or detecting anomalous activity. But yeah, there's no way that we can possibly provide a full guarantee, right? But at the same time, it really does provide a very comprehensive view, or at least a very good starting point to secure both the source and the build.
Cool. Did you, is that webinar public? Is that something we can link to in the notes?
Yes, I can actually. I can
Awesome.
I can drop a link in the chat.
Cool. Thank you. And Vicky, I think you're next.
Yeah. So I want to give a big +1 to what Melba said. I really like the idea of having some sort of a matrix or some presentation of, if you are looking at HIPAA, then our recommendation is for you to be at least at this level, right? Something that will make it very easy for people to understand, people who aren't security engineers and researchers, but who still need to think about this sort of stuff, right? So who is the audience for that, and how can we make it easy for them to do the right thing and take that information to their security teams? But our presentation of it must be, we got to be sensitive and careful about that, right? We can't say this is the end all be all, this is the only way to do it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So keeping our audience in mind and being very clear with them, we make this recommendation, but you do you, honey, right? That sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'll defer to, I believe, Andres was next.
Thank you. So rereading the question of should everyone strive for Salsa 4? And looking at Salsa 4, you have two sets of criteria. One, two-party review and hermetic builds. To Michael's point, hermetic builds are somewhat aspirational. And in fact, no one's going to do hermetic builds for the sake of doing hermetic builds.
Yeah.
But Salsa could be what precipitates, like, even if it's to check a mandate that's coming top down, organization must comply with Salsa, and we should do so at the highest levels of confidence and trust. It's going to accelerate that. Now, taking two-party reviews out of it, I do think, and even the ways the website phrase it, is two-person reviews are an industry best practice for catching mistakes and deterring bad behavior. they're not of like zero cost. Like you're going to incur a cost or some overhead in doing 2-person reviews. But should this really belong at level 4? Shouldn't we be advocating that people would do that much earlier in their Salsa adoption journey, and not, well, it's not quite as a lift as Hermetic builds, and it's something that is doable today. Should we perhaps decouple these two?
Understanding is that it's to do with single person projects. Being
Yeah,
able to reach at least Salsa 3.
Yeah, a lot of the open source projects I think have like one maintainer, so even them getting another review is like a huge mountain to climb.
So I do think that's another thing we need to just sort of address, which is like, I am okay with saying that I'm sorry, but single maintainer projects maybe need to have more maintainers before people start using them. Like, because we saw that with some of the recent supply chain attacks where people were sort of compromising their own projects because for any of myriad number of reasons.
Goodbye half the JavaScript ecosystem right there.
Yeah,
I think it's okay to say politicizing.
Well, yeah, but I mean, some people, it was, hey, they there is indication that some projects, somebody might have been slipped some money to put something in their own project, right? You have multi-party reviews, that's, and then obviously there's also, a lot of the political stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's a good consideration, like, but it's a problem of increasing the maintainer pool or increasing the bust factor of a project. And it's almost as Salsa is making a concession of, well, we know this is a huge mountain to climb for you, but it shouldn't be recognized as this thing like gives any level of confidence if, well, tons of risk concentrated in a single individual having full responsibility for the project.
Are there hands that
Oh,
are up that should be down?
So I have one more comment, just which was more about the compliance piece, and just as a really quick thing, just for some folks who are not super familiar and maybe coming from companies who haven't really had to do the compliance piece. So just, I think there's I can't remember who had said it before, that there's most regulations and that sort of stuff is all sort of descriptive. I think Salsa is purposefully prescriptive. And so that's going to be a good mapping from, hey, here are the practices you can actually do that then hit those higher level things where they are, whether they're, NIST, SSDF or HIPAA or PCI or any of these other sorts of things. But I think we also need to be careful around there's a lot of concern about it's very easy to just say, yep, I checked the box in whatever the easiest way is humanly possible, even if it doesn't actually hit the end goal. So we just need to be cognizant of that.
Yeah, I agree. All right, let's take one more comment on here, and then we'll skip to the next agenda and maybe table this one for now.
I think Eric is next, and Andres' hand is still up from before.
Okay, Derek, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, thank you. Just a couple quick things. So I agree on the one person project kind of comment, but I think that kind of speaks toward more of a governance and best practices type of discussion as well. That be relevant in some of the other working groups, but overall for the compliance and other capability discussion, as we kind of work through the different levels, I think one of the key aspects I've seen very specifically, very recently, and trying to implement Salsa level 2, for example, is the Provenance Component. One of the things I think we would benefit quite a bit from in this group is to actually have associated case studies or potentially, example models of various different ways to implement, or at least documented ways to solve the problem. Obviously there's going to be variant ways to do it, but an example using some of Open SSF's maybe projects or very widely used, not one person projects, that can help solve some of these potential levels, right? So how do we do that? And of course, we're not trying to outline, hey, only use these tools, but here's a case study that is an example. Somebody from this group, and I'm not saying that we wouldn't provide these either, but somebody from this group being able to come forward and say, hey, here's an example of how we met level 2. Utilizing maybe some of these tools or these best practices or other things to help people adopt this a little easier.
Yeah. I think we have a case studies folder that we put in the repo with to be aspirational about putting more examples in there, and we definitely have a few. Like the Kubernetes project itself has some write-ups about how they're trying to reach the Salsa levels, and I know we have a few other examples like in the repo and other projects, but we should be better about calling these out and maybe even putting them on the website for others to use as a guidance.
Yeah, I think finding them is possibly part of the problem, and it just needs to be, maybe diagrammed out and made kind of a more official way to solve a problem.
Yeah. That was one of my I tweeted yesterday that I'd love to hear about companies like trying to meet Salsa in their own organizations, and maybe if some are more open about it, we could help with more case studies there. So I like it. All right, can we move on, or we have time? Well, I see one more hand up. Now I have my. Oh, Lauren, do you want to say something quick, and then we'll move on?
Yeah, I wanted to say something about two-party reviews. I think it's GitHub doesn't allow you to do this efficiently today, because so I think two-party reviews means two things. Like, do you have two LGTM on your PR is one thing, but some people can actually add code after the LGTMs happen. So, and GitHub doesn't allow you to do this in a very usable manner today. Like, either it's every time someone pushes a new commit to the pull request, it basically removes all the LGTM, which is virtually impossible in terms of usability. Or you have to accept that you LGTM a PR, and maybe you have two LGTMs, but someone can then just add a commit to the pull request. So it's not clear if this even counts as a two-party review if you do that. Like, it actually doesn't. So
yeah, that's a good point. I think that could
also,
help
I wanted to say, could we decouple the two LGTM review from everything else? Because I could see, like, I have Salsa 4, and technically I'm doing everything right, but my LGTM is 1, and that's like a different piece.
Yeah. I think that could be a whole nother topic.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Yeah. Lots of interesting things to talk about. Let's add that as another discussion topic or issue if we don't have it, and circle back to it. All right, moving on. Thank you, everyone. That was a good discussion. Zoltan, you want to take the stage?
Thank you. I promise I will be quick. It's just that when reading up on Salsa framework,
having some issue hearing you.
I try to speak up. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, a little bit.
Oh, well, okay. Maybe that's my headset. Anyway, so my topic came up when we analyzed Salsa framework for adoption in IBM Cloud. And as the discussion started with the threat model of the Salsa framework, we came up with 3 more ideas that we felt that could be added to the framework. So I thought I would come and share these ideas. We found them useful on our internal analysis, at least. So if I may take over the screen share for a little bit.
Yeah, go for it. I saw an issue about another threat that wasn't captured too. Was that you, or is that a different person?
No, that wasn't me.
Okay.
So this chart is based on your original. we extended it with items K and J and I think I. Yeah. So basically, we also came up with a written definition for them. So one is similar to your threat type D, which is about a compromised build environment, but it's rather about a compromised build tool or test tool. So if you upgrade your test tool and the new version comes compromised, then that can be a threat. That's the first one we identified. The second one, it's about if your records about dependencies used are incorrect. So you do not know exactly what kind of dependencies are used anymore. We had a hard time assessing the log4j incident. That's what triggered this item. And the last one is only relevant if you keep the same artifact in production for a while, which is vulnerabilities discovered after the artifact is built and deployed. How do you handle that? So these are the three ideas I'd like to propose. I see. I don't know who was first. Eric, maybe.
Those are still up from before. So go with Aaron.
Okay.
Hello. I'm curious if you can expand on the second item a little bit more. I'm curious to hear more about that.
You mean what we called item J? Basically, yes. So the threat here lies in if you do not keep your dependency records accurate, or if your dependency records become compromised in some way. So that can be obviously avoided if you use some kind of secure bill of materials, which are stored in a secure manner and stuff like that. But yeah, there's a threat in there if somebody accidentally or intentionally modifies these records.
Gotcha. And so are these items that you're kind of presenting, these are issues that you're kind of seeing, or are you able to speak to how you guys are addressing them? Am I getting ahead of myself?
We have some ideas.
Okay.
On how to address them. Yeah, these are actual issues that we've seen happen in our environment. Yes.
Sean?
Yeah, I think well, one of the problems that we're coming to grips with at the moment is the fact that when you start to factor in vulnerability information, it means that the status of artifacts changes over time. So if you create an artifact at one particular point, and then a vulnerability is discovered in it, if you're going to put that sort of information in the attestation, it means that the attestation can get out of date with respect to the artifact. And if you're making a statement about an artifact when you make the attestation, and the fact that it may change over time, does that mean that you then need to be able to modify things like the Salsa level or some other part of the attestation after the artifact has been generated? And that's why we've kind of steered clear and dealt with vulnerability information as orthogonal to our artifacts, and something that you can assess. You can come back and revisit details about the artifact, but they aren't things that would be covered in an attestation. So there's like stuff that changes over time, like vulnerability information, which we see as kind of orthogonal to the attestation about the process that generated that artifact.
So that totally makes sense. So yeah, we might consider removing that from this list, and yeah, mitigating it by rebuilding all of the artifacts and then regenerating the attestations on the build process or something like that. But yeah, thanks.
Mark?
Yeah, I think actually, I think it's important to clarify the model versus like the actual solutions here, because I think what you're describing here is the model. And so even if, however you implement it, like through attestations or whatever, it's probably useful, like for the model to capture it. So I don't think necessarily that it has to be stricken from here. You know, ultimately the model is a simplification of the overall problem to make it like easier for people to comprehend. I think for effectively, I think what you're saying is separating the compromise of the build tool, which is distinct from a compromise of the builder or a compromise of the dependencies. I think that also goes in line with, we have another open issue around, I think, differentiating between like sources versus dependencies versus build tools. So I think it's worth us thinking about expanding the model to include that, because I think it seems like a fairly important distinction. So that sounds good. I wonder for J and K, I certainly agree it doesn't really fit in the model that we have right now, like, because the model is really more written to convey integrity text of like tampering as opposed to like unintended vulnerabilities. One way to look at it would be like the actual inclusion of the vulnerability was something either through the source or the dependency, and then it was only like discovered after the fact. But yeah, I think at a minimum, I would like to include these vulnerabilities, these threats on the threat page, if they're not already there. And I think we should consider like, how do we, like the picture, how do we do the picture in a way that like is the right level of complexity? It's just not, I don't know one way or the other.
What are some good next steps here? Just create an issue with some of these ideas. Zoltan, would you be up for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I would be happy to.
Awesome.
I can also contribute this draft picture for further discussion.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I just hope we don't run out of letters in the alphabet.
Yeah, let's hope so.
All right, awesome. Thanks for sharing this.
Right, thank you.
Yeah. Laura, is your hand still up, or do you have another question? And I haven't been monitoring the chat very well either, so I see there's some discussion going on. I don't think I missed anything crazy, but feel free to shout out if I did. All right, and then let me screen share. Mike, you're back on the.
Sure. Okay, so this is something Andres had brought up a few days ago. I know he's not at a PC, so I will just actually share it. Give me 1 second to click the link, but oh, too many tabs open.
Are you screen sharing, or do you want me to screen share?
Yeah, if you could just screen share the issue.
Yeah.
Sorry, my machine's a bit of a mess right now. So this is sort of I think we've seen something like this sort of issue multiple times. This is pretty much, hey, the transitive salsa problem, like, and I think it ties into my second point of how do we communicate salsa better? Like, what is the purpose of a lot of these things? But to kind of just go through briefly, you know, I think there's concerns here like, hey, great. What if my end state application, you know, I built it reproducibly, you know, I built it, I know all my dependencies, I've, you know, I have two-party code review for my code, all that good stuff. Great, I'm Salsa 4. What does that actually mean, right? Because if one level above me is Salsa 0, and, you know, it's been compromised, what am I actually sort of getting out of it? This is sort of where the transitive salsa stuff that I know is still in discussion is being sort of thought out. But I think that then ties into my second point, which is how do we communicate this a little bit better so that folks understand, hey, you're Salsa 4. What does that actually mean? Honestly, it probably means not a lot right now. But it's valuable information that can then be used for other things down the line. And as we flesh out the transitive Salsa level, maybe we can provide other stuff. But just wanted to kind of get folks sort of thoughts on that, because even just from some of the stuff previously, right, we're talking about compliance, and folks are sort of concerned with, hey, you know, do I need to hit Salsa in order to hit a compliance requirement? Do I need to, you know? So I'd be curious to get folks' thoughts on that.
Yeah, one, I saw the thing. I haven't had time to respond yet. I think one thing to think about is like, one, there's the aspect, well, I guess a couple things. One, yes, I would really like for someone to have a proposal for how we make some sort of transitive Salsa level. I think that would be a great thing. I don't know if that has to be a separate level or some other score or something, but that would be great. So if anyone wants to do that or create a proposal or start that, that'd be fantastic. In terms of the value of Salsa by itself, I think one thing to think about is like who the threat actors are. So if you are an organization, let's say a company, and you have Salsa level 4 for your first party code, even if you know that all of your transitive inputs are like open source projects, there probably is still some sort of value because your employees, your insider risk is reduced because those employees can't compromise your code. It's true that someone could compromise the open source packages, but that's kind of a different attack. Has different visibility. The actors who can do that are different. It requires a different set of capabilities. And so I think that's something to keep in mind, that like not every package is created equal. It's not like it's equally easy to compromise one package versus another. So I wouldn't dismiss the value in having Salsa. For my own company, we happen to use a mono repo. And so in this case, we don't really have, well, we have transitive dependencies, but like it looks different in our picture. And so again, the threat, like in a mono repo case, it's, I think, more value, and that's kind of where we started from.
Yeah, that's super insightful. Thank you. For those like transient open source software that we see in our that make its way through first party software at my employer, that we dictate that software must be rebuilt from source. And going back a little bit to, well, we can't expect a lot of open source projects to do these things, but commercial vendors in the space, be it Red Hat, be it VMware, be it Cisco, like they're producing their downstream distributions of these different things. So what we hope to get our engineering teams to adhere to is, when you are building boring crypto, when you're building OpenSSL, you should strive to meet Salsa 4 in those components, and it will make the job easier packaging the end binaries of the products we're developing, showcase transitive levels and like the final aggregate score for it all. Does that make sense? Or just color where I'm coming from. Back at you, Mark.
Yeah, sorry, your mic was cutting in and out, so it was a little bit hard to hear. I don't think I fully comprehended everything. I think I'm a visual person, so I kind of find it difficult to picture things when listening. I think what you're saying is like what you might be saying is using the different salsa scores of the thing and kind of form like a graph and have some sort of transitive score? Is that what you were suggesting, or something else?
Very much so. And I'm happy to, I did create the issue to elicit some responses, see if it'd be worthwhile to even produce a proposal. But I am happy to come back with some proposed approach and some diagrams.
Yeah. So
Specify
so
things
I
a little
don't.
bit better.
I couldn't tell from your issue if you meant this issue to mean purely about the transit problem, or if there was anything else. If there's other things, it might be good to split. But in terms of the transit thing, yeah, I think having a concrete proposal would be great. Originally, when we were drafting the salsa, the original draft salsa levels, we did have some concept of transitivity. And one of the challenges with having something transitive is that, like, if all your inputs have to be the same level at the top level thing, and those inputs have to be at this level, you kind of can never start anywhere. You have to start like all the way at the very beginning from like some sort of kernel, and build up, which makes it challenging. But I think what you described of having like some score on top is, in my mind, a promising venue, because then we could have different ones for different use cases. Like you said, like the crypto was one particular use case. And so I think you could build up some sort of practical level or score or metric or something like that, for different use cases. Like you could say, okay, well, I'm going to do all of these for my source dependencies, but not my like build tool dependencies or something like that. Or you could kind of have some sort of thresholding to say like some inputs are more important than others. I think there's certainly room for that. And so if you have proposals, that would be fantastic.
For sure. Yeah. And you're right. I did conflate 2 or 3 different ideas into this issue. But on transitiveness, it's more about, hey, do we have information available if salsa levels were present on the artifacts or on the inputs? Can we represent that and inform that the dependencies did go through salsa review, rather than imposing this will not build unless all the dependencies are salsa 3?
Sean, you've had your hand up for a bit.
Yeah, I think, just to expand on the idea of kind of being able to graph this as well, I think there is value in that, and being able to generate at least some sort of metric about an entire stack, because when you're looking at a bundle of attestations, it tells you a lot about all the individual things that are in there, but not why they're the way they are. And so being able to kind of map out that graph and decide whether, okay, well, I've got a bunch of artifacts here that are all source level 4, and the particular part of that graph that I'm interested in has an entry point there which only maps to that part of the graph, means that I can use that comfortably in a source of 4, or with the source of 4 level of trust on it. But if I'm using the whole thing as a whole, I need to be able to calculate how much trust I should be able to put in the entire stack, as opposed to just the individual artifacts in it. And that gives you some interesting potential remediations as a consumer of artifacts. If you're not actually involved in the production of those artifacts, or you're not involved all the way back to the source code, then you can make decisions and you can make remediations to the level of trust that you want to put into your software stack by modifying versions or artifacts or sources for artifacts that form your stack. And so that gives you some agency as a user and just a consumer of artifacts, in that you can make choices on the artifacts that you consume that and give you kind of improvements to your overall level of trust in your stack.
So almost like a score, if you will, for the whole graph.
Yeah, pretty much a score for the graph, but also a way to reason about why that score is what it is.
That's interesting. David? You're
Hey
next.
there. Yeah, so real quick, I think the idea of trying to come up with some sort of transitive score is probably a good long-term idea, but probably not worth focusing on right now. Here's my argument. I am sure that this group can come up with a number of algorithms to calculate some sort of transitive score. I mean, the obvious one is take the set of all your dependencies, find the minimum Salsa value, which is probably 0. Congratulations, you have a transitive score. If you don't like that, you could use an average. Maybe you could weight it by how close it is. We can do all sorts of things. No, my point is that there's a lot of ways you can calculate it. But for most of the transitive dependencies, they're not going to be using Salsa. So the problem is, it doesn't matter what algorithm we use, we're not going to have enough inputs to matter. So what I would suggest is, you know, mature up Salsa. We've got some questions about wording, some changes, and so on, to make it stronger, and then go back once we're hopefully many projects will start using Salsa once it's more mature, and then we'll have some inputs to use in an algorithm. We'll also have an idea of what the data will look like, so we'll be able to make a better choice for some sort of algorithm for combining the data. But I have no doubt that we can do the combined data somehow to provide something, but I'm worried we're talking about it too soon. Does that make sense? Okay, anyway, my claim.
Before we run, right?
Yeah, basic. Well, walk and don't run until we've got enough data to know where we should have put our feet.
Don't run after you hit critical mass, more like it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm not opposed to the idea. I just think that until we have more data, this is the wrong question to pursue, because we don't have enough data to see if whatever we choose is a good one.
The counter is you're going to have a lot of people that are just going to do Salsa for the sake of compliance. And once they're done, they're going to call it a day.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, I think that to me is actually kind of more of the communication problem, right? Like, I think we just really need to have folks understand what Salsa is and what Salsa isn't. And yeah.
If I might butt in, is there any sort of requirement for continuous monitoring within Salsa that could potentially mitigate that issue?
What do you mean by continuous monitoring?
Essentially, continuous monitoring to make sure that Salsa standards are still adhered to. Obviously, there's the point of we certify that a build pipeline. Yeah, continuous compliance is a really good way of articulating it. But yeah, like once we have certified that particular build achieves, say, Salsa level 3, how do we ensure that changes aren't introduced within the actual build that produces it?
So ideally, we do want to have like every build should be generating that sort of provenance metadata, and then where that provenance metadata maybe isn't disclosed, let's say it's a vendor, they don't want to disclose their stuff and some third-party auditor is certifying that. There's definitely routes we can do there, but I think the idea is, Salsa attestations normally have timestamps. I mean, they have timestamps on them, I should say. And so if folks are concerned about, like, hey, when is the last time, this thing had a Salsa attestation, we can kind of look back a week, 2 months, whatever. And the individual sort of consumer of that sort of thing can expire it. But I think that also leads into the next thing, which is just, I don't want to go too deep down the rabbit hole. I think there's 2 things I kind of wanted to address there, which concerns me about some of the transitive scores and whatever, and maybe something like how critical of a piece of software is important, right? Like this is something I brought up a couple of times, is if I have 1,000 dependencies and 999 of them are just nonsense, and 1 is OpenSSL and OpenSSL is Salsa 0, the rest of them are all Salsa 4. I really want to know that my my encryption and security libraries are the ones that have a high level of Salsa. Some of the other ones, maybe if they're not within a critical path, I don't care so much. but given some of the stuff that's been brought up already, it could be very easy to game it. And and to be clear, that's up to the enterprise to kind of sort some of that stuff, or the individual organization or project to sort some of that stuff out for themselves. But that's just something we should highlight. And then separately, I think that there is also a pretty big open question on, is the transitive Salsa level up to the producer or up to the consumer, right? Because there is some valuable arguments around, hey, here is, here's my transit, I can pull out elements of that graph. And then there might be elements of that graph that I do not have access to, right? This comes from some vendor that is attesting that they are Salsa level X, but they are not providing higher level information into their element, their aspect of the graph. So is that something that we wanted to sort of like, at what level do folks feel comfortable with sort of making that attestation on their behalf? How much of that is them saying, hey, you as the consumer should run a query yourself to figure that sort of information out? So that's some of the stuff I know Jacques has talked about with the universal asset graph, right? Is, hey, if we have Salsa attestations and this Salsa attestation has these dependent Salsa attestations, and you can keep going back, at certain points you might not have those. At certain points it might go into things where people are saying you don't have access to my aspect of the, my half of the graph. Anyway, just some things to sort of consider there.
I'm stoked you mentioned the universal asset graph because it means I'm not the only one doing it, like a lunatic. But I won't talk about it. Two things that jumped out at me. One is in terms of the question of communicating Salsa levels for dependencies. That's something got discussed in the vulnerability score attestation or something attestation. I forget what it is, VSA. And the main thing that I pushed for there was that each of the levels should be counted separately. So you should have one data point for Salsa level 4 dependencies, for level 3, level 2, etc. Because this leads to my second point. Salsa is an ordinal scale. It's not a nominal scale. It's not a ratio scale or an interval scale. It's an ordinal scale. So there are names, they have an ordering, but that's it. That's all you can derive from it. That means that the operations that you can perform on it sort of arithmetically are limited. You can bucket things together. You can count them. That makes sense. You can take a minimum or a maximum. That makes sense. But taking an average doesn't make sense. Right? It's like taking the average of people who got gold, silver, and bronze. It's not a meaningful operation. Now, I put this rant on the record because I would be prepared to bet folding money that somewhere a vendor has a ticket in a backlog that says, let's give them the average Salsa score for their dependencies, and I'm not about it. And this concludes your rant allocation for the day.
Sounds like a valid rant to me. Laura, you want to go next?
Sure. What is it? What I wrote? So Asra and I presented some work at the last meeting on doing Salsa 3 and above generation and verification using GitHub workflows. I just wanted to say that we've migrated that repo to the Salsa framework, and we're working on making it production ready. So if anyone is interested in helping out, collaborating, testing, poking at the code, you're welcome to come and join the party.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks. Did you have a comment on the other topic too? I think we've got through most of the agenda items. So if we want to.
Oh, are you asking me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I had just a comment on the scores. Like I work a lot on a scorecard, and we found out that, I think it's, in retrospect, it's probably obvious, but we found out that scores are not granular enough in practice to enforce policies at the consumer level. So when you run scorecard, just having scores makes it not super actionable if you want to enforce flexible policies on top of it. And I feel that Salsa is kind of like this as well. So when you start adding dependencies and transitive dependencies, calculating scores is basically losing so much information. I think, like people said, like criticality and things like that. So I just want to say that what we're doing in scorecard now is we're also going to output like the more raw results before we've applied any kind of scoring. And we let users apply some policies so they can actually decide, like, I want these settings to be on in branch protection, or I want reviews to have 2 reviews, and I want only this list of reviewers to have reviewed the pull request and things like this. And I feel that this model might actually also work for Salsa, so long as you give that information, the consumer can decide and interpret the way they want. Because even something as simple as criticality means very different things based on who, like which consumer is using the Salsa provenance information.
Yeah, I agree with that. We ran into that before. It was just people had so many different ways they wanted to apply policy or use the data. So just making sure the data available, I think is the right first step. Mark,
Yeah, I think I agree about not having like boiling it down to one number because it's not super meaningful. I think if we think about like how would an organization use this data and use it to reduce their risk, because ultimately what Salsa is about is reducing risk. I think that's important to keep in mind. And I suspect that probably like a way that a lot of organizations would use it, or maybe the way that we could show them using it, would be to, one, be able to identify the things that are high risk because the Salsa level is low. And so you wouldn't necessarily need to know that, oh, 5 out of 15 dependencies are this, but rather we would identify, oh, here's where we might want to focus effort to shore up our security, or maybe remove these dependencies because I find them too risky or something like that. So using it more as like a guide as opposed to like a checkbox of like I'm good or not is probably useful. It's probably also useful to use to actually average the score and average, like, or have some sort of number of like bronze, silver, gold, not in terms of like you're good or not, but rather for motivating organizations. If you have some teams and you have different, 15, 20 different teams if you're in a large organization, or like hundreds or thousands of teams if you're in a huge organization, you could kind of use it to name and shame effectively of like, hey, you need to get your things up to snuff. And if you want to make some sort of bulk change across a large organization, that sort of number is useful. But it is important to note like the limitations of it, of like this number or whatever is useful for your organization purely for getting people to move, and not because you're trying to actually boil down risk into some number. So those are maybe things ways that people could use some sort of transitive metric to add value to an organization. I think Sean might have been next.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the score, there's a risk there that organizations use it as a up and to the right kind of metric, where they will just see that, try to drive improvements in the number, and that leads to kind of the gamification issue that I think we mentioned earlier. But I agree as well that I think more granularity in the data that we present is useful as well. So saying, okay, well, this would have been Salsa level 4, but it's only Salsa level 3 because we didn't hit hermeticity or one of the other requirements, would allow users to basically make their own decisions, because there's multiple ways you can attack risk. You can mitigate it, you can ignore it, you can insure against it, you can do anything you like, and users should be given the chance to make their own determination about their risk posture towards a given artifact based on why it didn't make the particular Salsa grade that you were aiming for.
Mike, you want to go next? Oh, it's such a good discussion today.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
boil this down into issues or something. I got lots of ideas on the communication piece. And
So two things. One is actually in celebration, I guess, of the new Salsa blog that I know is coming out that we plan to sort of, I am writing a blog article to sort of talk through some of these things, like what would a hypothetical organization, how would it use it, my thoughts on that. But I do think this, because I do want to kind of transition just a little bit into the better communication of Salsa piece, which I think a lot of this sort of stuff is, hey, there's still a lot of confusion on how folks use Salsa, how you could, what makes the information valuable, what is it even saying? And I think one of the things that, to kind of go in there a little bit, that has been missing from the conversation is, we haven't done I think a good job at communicating, is really communicating that Salsa is an addition to what you're already doing. Like, don't stop doing SAST and DAST and other security scans and just switch to Salsa. It's like, no. This is in conjunction with it to sort of provide that integrity and provenance piece to say, hey, you were doing SAST and DAST scans before, but you couldn't guarantee whether or not you were actually scanning what you were running in production. Here, we're saying by doing these Salsa practices, you can start to build that visibility into your supply chain where you're like, yeah, you did the SAST and DAST scans, you built your software, you did all that sort of stuff. And we have some level of proof and a chain of custody saying, yes, what you ran in production did have those scans. Those scans happened on these days. They were signed off by these services. And I think that sort of stuff is really valuable, but I think that level of it is really not being communicated very well. And maybe some of these blog articles, maybe some clarifications would be really, really valuable.
Cool. Yeah, I agree. I feel like we could use a whole 3-day workshop on Salsa, or I don't know if folks are all congregating at some conference together or something to work through these and come out with some good stuff on the other side. But I'm sure we'll make progress as we go anyway. All right, any last minute comments, or we're gonna call it a day? Great discussion though, everyone. This was awesome.
So are we going to throw a salsa party at DEF CON?
Probably should. I'm not raising my hand to volunteer any kind of coordination and organization. One shout out for Jory for setting up the blog. I think she helped there. I'm not sure if she's still on the call, but thank you. All right, cool. So we can continue into the discussion on issues in Slack, and thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you again in a few weeks.
Cool. Thanks.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, bye.